to the deep dive. Today, we're digging into something pretty heavy, actually. It's about Argentina under Juan Domingo Perón, becoming this refuge for Nazis after World War II.
Yeah, it's a really striking situation. I mean, Argentina is so far away from Europe, geographically speaking. So why on earth would it become a haven for people, fleeing justice after the Holocaust? It's the big question, isn't it?
It absolutely is. It feels like a historical puzzle. So we've gathered various historical overviews, and our aim here is to, really try and understand why, what were the motivations, what were the consequences.
Right, let's try and piece it together.
So the core question we're tackling is, what led Argentina, which seems so removed from the conflict, to essentially open its doors to those escaping judgment for, horrific atrocities?
Okay, so to really get a handle on this, you have to look back, look at Argentina's existing connections. Our sources really stress these long-standing ties with European countries.
Like Spain, obviously.
Spain, yeah, definitely. Colonization, the language.
Yeah.
But also really strong links with Italy and Germany. A lot of immigration over the years, generations even.
Ah, right. So for many Argentines, these weren't just like distant countries. They were ancestral homelands, part of their own cultural fabric.
Exactly. Real cultural ties, family roots. And it wasn't just about people either. There was significant economic cooperation with Germany even before the war kicked off.
Okay, that makes sense. Pre-existing economic links strengthening those bonds. And then, of course, there's the man himself, Juan Perón.
He's absolutely central to this story. The sources point to his personal admiration for Mussolini, for Italian fascism. He actually served time in Italy, didn't he?
Yeah, from 1939 to 1941. How much did that experience really, shape his thinking?
Well, it seems like it had a pretty direct impact. Being there, seeing fascism firsthand,
right.
You can definitely see echoes of those Italian and German models in his later political approach, Peronism. Plus, he apparently had a lot of respect for the German military, just purely from a professional standpoint. So this personal leaning definitely created a more sympathetic backdrop towards the Axis.
Okay. And during the war itself, Argentina was officially neutral. But, like you hinted, the sources suggest it wasn't exactly impartial neutrality.
No, not really. That's putting it mildly. While they were officially neutral, there was a lot of pro-Axis feeling, especially in government and military circles. You had Nazi agents active in Argentina.
Argentine agents over in Axis territory too, right?
Exactly. Officers, spies. It paints a picture of a nation that maybe wasn't fighting, but was definitely leaning heavily in one direction.
And this is where it gets even more complicated. Argentina was actually buying arms from Germany.
Yeah.
Partly because they were worried about Brazil, apparently.
Yes, that fear of Brazil's military buildup was a factor. And Germany, in return, was dangling these promises of favorable trade deals after the war.
Plus, Buenos Aires acting as this sort of secret port for Axis supplies.
Yeah, that's what the sources indicate. Things like platinum, vital chemicals being shipped through Buenos Aires to the Axis powers. It was quite the operation, it seems.
And the declaration of war on the Axis, March 1945. That feels incredibly late.
Oh, it was symbolic, really, just about a month before the war in Europe ended. And there are even reports that Perón was privately, reassuring his German contacts around that time.
So if you put all that together, the historical ties, Perón's own views, the pro-Axis sentiment, the murky neutrality, it starts to make a bit more sense, doesn't it? Why offering refuge later wasn't such a huge leap for someone within Argentina.
Precisely. The stage was sort of set, so now we need to dive into Perón's specific reasons for actively helping these Nazis escape.
Right. Let's get into Peronism or justicialism. His political ideology. Broadly, it's about social justice, economic independence, political sovereignty.
How did that feed into harboring Nazis?
Well, a key part of it was this idea of Argentina being independent, not tied to the U.S., not tied to the Soviets, this third position.
Okay, standing apart from the major powers. Exactly. So defying international pressure about handing over Nazi fugitives, that could be seen as, a powerful statement. We make our own decisions. It fits that narrative of sovereignty.
And his anti-communism seems really crucial here, too.
Hugely important. Perón saw the Soviet Union, communism, as a major threat. The thinking, apparently, was that these Nazi war criminals, fiercely anti-communist, often with military backgrounds, they could actually be useful.
Useful? How so?
As potential assets, in a future fight against the Soviets. It sounds cynical, but it was a kind of strategic calculation, looking ahead to the Cold War that was already brewing.
A very pragmatic, if deeply unsettling calculation. And then there were his ambitions for Argentina itself, industrialization, a stronger military.
Right, and where do you get the expertise for that quickly? Perón seems to have viewed German scientists, engineers, military guys as a ready-made pool of talent to help boost Argentina's development.
So bringing in skilled people, even if their past was problematic.
That seems to be part of the calculation. And we can't ignore the money side of things.
Yes. Wealthy Germans, Argentine Germans funding escapes, and the Nazis themselves, often arriving with looted wealth.
It's an uncomfortable part of the story, but yeah. The potential inflow of money, both to grease the wheels of the escape routes and the personal fortunes coming in, that likely played a role too.
And finally, the sources mention Perón's personal feelings, sympathy for the defeated Axis, seeing the Nuremberg trials as, what, a farce?
Yeah, basically viewing Nuremberg as victor's justice, maybe even seeing himself as rescuing fellow soldiers in a strange way. His admiration for Axis figures and his distrust of the post-war process seem to have solidified his resolve.
So it's this mix. Ideology, strategy, economics, personal conviction. It wasn't just passive acceptance, it was active facilitation, right, through these rat lines.
Absolutely, and the level of organization is pretty striking. Perón's government apparently sent out secret orders, diplomats, intelligence officers, told to set up escape routes, mainly running through Spain and Italy.
So Argentine agents were actually sent to Europe to help Nazis get out.
That's what the evidence suggests. Agents deployed to Spain, Italy, Switzerland, Scandinavia, with clear instructions: help Nazis get to Argentina. These weren't just, informal networks. This was state-backed.
And the role of the Catholic Church comes up here too, and it sounds quite controversial.
It really does raise difficult questions. Certain members of the clergy, motivated perhaps by intense anti-communism, maybe some lingering sympathy.
Okay.
They're documented providing false papers, helping with travel.
Any specific names mentioned?
Yeah, figures like Bishop Elo Hudal, using Vatican documents apparently, and even the Argentine Cardinal Antonio Caggiano are implicated in facilitating these escapes.
Wow. So a network involving the Argentine state, potentially parts of the church, and you mentioned existing Nazi sympathizers already in Argentina helping out.
Correct. They collaborated with Perón's government to organize the actual immigration. And the support didn't stop when they landed.
What happened then?
Well, reports indicate they often received money, help finding jobs, basically, support to integrate into Argentine society, make a new life.
Let's talk about some of the most infamous names who ended up there. Adolf Eichmann has to be top of the list for many people.
Eichmann, yeah. A key architect of the Holocaust. It's chilling. He arrived in Argentina in 1950, living as Ricardo Clement.
And he just lived there.
Relatively openly, yeah.
Yeah.
In a suburb of Buenos Aires, worked at Mercedes-Benz for a while, for about 10 years, until the Mossad caught up with him in 1960.
That capture story is incredible. Nabbed off the street, smuggled to Israel.
Absolutely dramatic, led to his trial, conviction, execution, and of course, a massive diplomatic row between Israel and Argentina.
Argentina must have been furious about the sovereignty violation.
Oh, extremely. They took it to the UN Security Council. It was a major international incident.
And then there's Joseph Mengele, the angel of death from Auschwitz.
Mengele. His experiments were just horrific. He got to Argentina in 1949 using the name Helmut Gregor.
Did he live openly too?
Initially, somewhat. But as the hunt for Nazis ramped up, he became more cautious, went more underground. West Germany actually asked for his extradition.
And Argentina said no.
They refused the request. Mengele later moved on, first to Paraguay, then Brazil. He drowned there in 1979, never having faced trial.
Unbelievable. Yeah. And Ante Pavelic, leader of the Ustaj in Croatia, responsible for mass murder.
He also found refuge in Argentina, arriving in 1948 as Don Pedro Goner. And what's really disturbing is that he apparently even worked as a security advisor for Perón.
It really paints Argentina as a major destination for these fugitives. What was the rest of the world saying about this? Were they just unaware?
Oh, there was awareness, especially among the Allies. The U.S., particularly during the war, was putting pressure on Argentina over its pro-Axis stance. You had Ambassador Sproul Brayton being very outspoken, the famous Blue Book detailing Argentina's policies.
But after the war, did that pressure continue?
Well, things shifted, didn't they? The Cold War started heating up, priorities changed. Fighting communism became the main game for many, especially the U.S. So while there was awareness, maybe the The will to push really hard on the Nazi fugitive issue wasn't always there, especially if those fugitives were seen as potentially useful anti-communists.
A grim trade-off. But the Eichmann capture in '60 must have blown that wide open again.
Absolutely. That put Argentina right back in the spotlight. It forced the issue onto the global stage in a way that couldn't be ignored, leading to that diplomatic crisis with Israel we mentioned. It really laid bare what had been happening.
And we have to mention the role of Nazi hunters, like Simon Wiesenthal. Their persistence seems vital.
Incredibly important. Wiesenthal's work, his role in tracking Eichmann, it was tireless. And organizations like the Simon Wiesenthal Center continue that work in Latin America today, keeping the memory alive, pushing for accountability.
What about extraditions over the years? Did other countries try to get these people back?
Yes, Germany and others definitely made requests. Initially, Argentina often resisted. They'd cite legal reasons, maybe argue it was a political offense, which wasn't covered by extradition treaties.
Legal loopholes, essentially.
You could see it that way. It highlights that tension between national laws and international justice. But over time, especially as global norms shifted and maybe internal politics changed in Argentina, their stance did evolve. Some, like Priebke, were eventually extradited, though often decades later.
Looking back this whole episode, it's clearly a really controversial, difficult part of Argentina's history, isn't it? Must have impacted their identity, their international image.
Massively. It's something that's still debated and wrestled with in Argentina. You had President de la Rua issue an official apology back in 2000, which was a pretty big deal.
And it's important to remember, Argentina also had and has a very large Jewish community, the biggest in Latin America. How do they experience this period?
That's a crucial and painful layer. They faced anti-Semitism, which was sometimes fueled by Nazi propaganda brought in by sympathizers, and definitely inflamed by the presence of these fugitives. After Eichmann was captured, for instance, there was reportedly a surge in anti-Semitic attacks.
So you have this paradox, a country offering refuge to Jews fleeing persecution, but also welcoming the perpetrators.
Exactly. It's a deep contradiction. And Argentina has been taking steps more recently to confront this past, declassifying government files about Nazi activities, the escape routes.
So historians are digging into those now?
Yes. Historians, organizations like the Wiesenthal Center, they're examining these documents, trying to get a fuller picture, uncover more of the truth. It's an ongoing process.
And that recent discovery, Nazi propaganda found in the Supreme Court basement. Just a stark reminder that this history isn't entirely buried.
Not at all. It keeps resurfacing. And we have that table summarizing some key figures, their crimes, aliases, time in Argentina, their fate. It puts faces, however disturbing, to this history.
Yeah, it really drives home the individual stories within this bigger picture.
And the long shadows they cast.
So, wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear that Argentina becoming a Nazi haven wasn't simple. It was this really complex mix of things. History, ideology, strategy, money, personal feelings, all tangled together.
Right. And it's so important to stress again. While Argentina did help some Jewish refugees, welcoming notorious war criminals is, well, an undeniable and deeply troubling part of its history.
Eichmann's capture really seems like the moment the world couldn't look away anymore.
It was a definite turning point in terms of global awareness, and the fact that documents are still being opened up shows this is a history still being actively confronted.
Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to consider. Given all these complex motivations we've discussed, the desire for sovereignty, anti-communism, industrial ambition, what does Argentina's story tell us about how nations define themselves, about political choices, and about the pursuit of justice after massive global conflicts?
And maybe what responsibility do nations have even decades later when it comes to dealing with those who committed atrocities? It's something to think about.